Welcome everyone to the business/study session meeting we have tonight. We have one item of business at the very top of the agenda. So if everyone would join me, stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All members are present, and I will now entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So made.
By Director Franz, second by Director Atkinson. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries 7-0. Moving down to new business, we have proposed premiums and RFPs for benefits. Director Herman.
Thank you, Chair White, members of the board. Today we're bringing forward our benefit administration and rate changes proposals that were reviewed by the Insurance Committee on March 10th. First, we're recommending staying with Voya for our long-term disability, group life, and supplemental life, and staying with Delta Dental for our dental insurance. For health insurance, we're recommending a 5% rate increase, which would adjust for the increases in claims along with maintaining our fund balance at the top of our healthy balance premium there. And then for the dental rates, for the active employees, a 5% increase with a 10% increase for the retirees of 65 plus bracket.
All right, I will entertain a motion to approve these premium changes.
So made.
By Director Atkinson, second.
Second.
By Director Bullion. Is there discussion or questions? All right, hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries 7-0. I will now entertain a motion to adjourn the regular portion of the meeting.
So made.
By Director Franz, second.
Second.
By Director Johnson. There's no discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0. All right, we'll start the study session portion of our evening and move on to the public forum. We do have one speaker tonight, Joyce Weisstad. Did I get that right? Wallstead. You may come up to the podium if you wish.
Hello. I'm just going to pull up my fancy paper here. So, my name is Joyce Wallstead, and I work at the Life Skills program in Westwood Elementary with my co-teacher Alex Fisher. And we just wanted to take a moment today to share some positive things with you guys, especially since there has been a lot of tough decisions going on lately and tough things happening. And we just also kind of wanted to brag a little bit about our amazing students. So, in February, our Life Skills students got to participate in the readathon event at the school. For some context, most of our students spend a lot of their time in a specialized classroom where they focus on learning school expectations, social skills, and emotional regulation. But they're also working on the hard things like academics as well. So, seeing them take part in this readathon event was a really big deal. They transitioned to new classrooms and environments that they weren't familiar with, sat down to read, and participated in 20-minute rotations with their general education peers. And they did this all with great behavior and engagement. It was great to see. This, to me, is a true example of inclusion, something that definitely wouldn't have been possible back in September, but because of their hard work and dedication, they've come so far, and we're very proud of them. So, that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, now moving on to the purpose and agenda. Dr. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair White. So for our board study session tonight, we've got a few agenda items that we're going to be covering. We'll do some budget updates. That's kind of standing for us until the end of the school year. A brief staffing update. We'll have our long-term facilities maintenance report, which will be your tenure that you'll see in cumulative, but we're going to focus our conversation on the next 2 years because obviously the longer we get out, there's a lot of unknowns, but we'll be focusing it there. And then we've got a series of proclamations that we will review with the board. And then I believe we'll take a short transition break while the board then sets up for, we'll do policies, a series of 800 policies, and then we'll have a transition for the board to then go into your 200 policies as well. So that is our content for this evening to dive into together.
All right, thank you. First on the agenda is then the 25-26 budget updates. Director Frederickson.
Thank you, Chair White. I have two updates for you tonight. One of them is the kindergarten enrollment, which I've been giving you at every board meeting. This update is as of March 14th. We have 444 kindergartners currently enrolled with 6 open enrolled for a total of 450, which if you look at the previous 5 years, we're about 88% of where we are expected from October 1st, which means if you calculate that out, our October 1st enrollment would be 511 kindergartners, which again is still just under 40 below what we had last year. So we're kind of still tracking on that 30 to 40 students. I can take any questions.
Are there any questions for Tammy? Nope. Okay, can move on.
The second update I have for you is our revenue projection. As you know, we've been tracking at about $120,403,030 for a revenue projection. I've adjusted that. The formula allowance, we've been using 2.5. It's actually going to be 2.74. So I've added an additional 0.24% to that formula allowance. I've also reduced the per pupil by about 36 kindergartners, but then I've also added 14.4 voluntary pre-kindergarten students that we'll be getting. The voluntary pre-K count as a 0.6 ADM. So if we add those back in, then our new revenue projection is $120,356,825. So again, we'll keep updating that as the legislature moves on, and if there's any changes. I know the governor released a new budget proposal last week, so we'll track that and see what makes it through till the end. And we'll continue to monitor our kindergartners.
Okay. Any questions? Mary.
Tammy, do you have any word or updates on reductions in federal funds? For the minimal that we do get, it still is significant considering our budget situation. Do you have any idea?
There has been no updates. We have gotten an email from Commissioner Jett, and he says as of right now, they haven't heard anything. So we're just going to be moving on, assuming that we're getting what we've expected. We'll continue to monitor that, but until we get something definitive, we'll keep going the way we have planned. We can always pivot later. Those are dollars that we can certainly track separately as we move along.
Thank you.
Chair White, if I may just extend a little bit on that question. So this Wednesday, I'll be heading out to DC, and this is actually a big conversation topic that we were initially planning to have with the Department of Education, so we'll see what transpires there. But with the changes with the department and potentially those things coming to us with as block grants, we're going to be pushing to understand what federal guidance will be attached to those block grants, and or what autonomy do the then states have around those block grants as well. So that will be a big conversation that we intend to bring to the Department of Ed for whoever is there when we go out there this Wednesday. So I will update the board more when we return, on Friday.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? All right, thank you, Director Ferguson. Yes.
Chair White, I'm sorry, I was going to just add one more thing. And as part of our updates, one of the things that I just want to share with the board, so as we're forecasting for next year, as you see here today, we are also really hitting the brakes on all of our cost containments for this year as well. So we're really pumping the brakes on a lot of unnecessary spending, meaning that if we have contracts or things that we can live without between now and the end of the school year, we are pushing pause on a lot of that so that we can monitor that spending level. I will continue to go through contracts as we foreshadow for next year to see which contracts we may begin to continue to eliminate, and that we will eliminate for next year to contain additional costs. And one of the measures that I'm engaging in for this year as well is that how can we move and repurpose administrative functions to maybe reprioritize and reorganize departmental budgets so that we can put as many resources directly into our schools. As a district services center, our number one customer are our schools. So that's why we exist. And we want to make sure that we are putting as many resources into our schools because we know that's where our number one customer for the district is, and that's our students. And so I will be looking at ways that we can contain administrative costs by way of shifting and or repurposing administrative functions appropriately so that we may be able to continually free up resources that go directly into student support. So we'll be bringing some of that into our April budget update to the board, but just know that those are continued conversations that we're going through as an administrative team so that we can contain costs not only for next year, but also pumping the brakes on our spends as we monitor to try to bring this to a structurally balanced budget for future years. So just want to give you that update.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any questions or comments for Dr. Thomas? Okay. We will move on then to, let's see here, where are we at? Staffing update, 25-26, Director Herman.
Chair White, members of the board, thank you. I just want to give you all an update over the last few weeks. District leadership has been working very hard through some pretty tough decisions and had a lot of really tough conversations last week with a lot of our staff members that we had to give announcements to. We were dedicated to continue our timeline to let them know before spring break, and we worked really diligently to try to even move up that announcement even further so that they can be competitive in the market. So we did a lot of announcements last Friday, and we'll bring those to the board on April 14th for action, but just wanted to give them a heads up as soon as we possibly could. So I just wanted to give a public gratitude for the union leadership that collaborated with us, the district leadership, and then all of our staff. We heard a lot of great stories about our staff being very supportive of each other, really rallying together to support the individuals that were receiving some tough news last week. So I just wanted to give a kudos out to our staff community for always focusing on our students and being there for each other when we're processing difficult news. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Moving down to the LTFM report. Director Powers, you want to come up?
Superintendent Thomas mentioned, I want to focus on the first 2 years, but I wanted to make sure I've had, can everyone hear it? I don't know if it's even.
I don't know if that's on.
No, it is.
Oh, there.
Many people have asked for a more complete vision for the LTFM for the 10-year. So I included all of the identified projects that can be used on our LTFM funding. So there are projects that aren't on here because they can't be used with our LTFM money. But these are identified projects as of now that may change as I continue to do inspections and in going through the rest of the buildings. The first 2 years of this cycle, I wanted to concentrate on the things that we could be most impactful with, which is why you see a lot of seal coating jobs at the schools. If we can keep up on the seal coating, maybe I can get those parking lots to last longer so we don't have to replace them in 2 years. We can go maybe 5, 7 years before we replace those. So that's why you see a lot of seal coating, and you see I've got overlays on this schedule down several years. So hopefully if the parking lots behave, we can keep that schedule up there. Then we've got a lot of other things, including some docks. There's at least 2 docks in the next couple of years, loading docks that we need to replace. The one at Five Hawks is falling apart, and the one at Glendale is not doing much better. So it's issues like that I want to make sure that we address when we've got a safety concern and when we've got a concern about indoor air quality for the students. So those are the primary things I'm going to be looking at for the first 2 years. If you saw any of those things in there that you had questions about, I would love to hear your thoughts about any of those. Like I say, especially for this first 2 years, but if you're seeing something down in the following years, I would lay humongous odds that we will be looking at all those years in more detail and changing them around again. As our priorities change, my department has to deal with the priorities more than almost anything else for those buildings. Something will pop up and we'll have to make quick changes. I think I mentioned earlier in the season, one of the things I wanted to make sure and highlight on that is we work really hard to do things as well as we can with the money we have, and sometimes emergencies happen. And thankfully, this winter, we had an opportunity to make an impactful decision because we were planning ahead a different type of replacement. What it was the boiler that was going to be replaced at Hidden Oaks. We had a desperate need at Jeffers Pond. Right before winter was coming on, we were going to, one of our boilers went down. And going into the heating season, only having one boiler would have been, we would have had a Chili's building at the best. If we would have lost the other boiler, I would have lost the building. So we were thankful that we had that boiler and that it was able to be installed so that we were able to make sure that those problems didn't happen. So we'll continue to look at things along those lines and we'll make sure that, like I mentioned, we want to be as impactful as we can, as conscious with our money as we can. One of the things on the list, or a couple of things, are with the Hidden Oaks swimming pools. We want to make sure, since we're looking at closing Twin Oaks, that I got the work done at Hidden Oaks that I needed to make sure, well, we still had 2 pools, so I can close that one down. So you'll see a few line items in regards to that. Were there any questions about any of the ones that were coming up? The ones that were highlighted in green were for this 2 years. The ones in tan are not on the schedule. Just honestly, it's not that they weren't important. Some of them are scheduled after the 10-year period. Some of them I just don't have places for on the schedule yet because of the amount of funds that we have available.
Any questions for
Yeah,
Dr.
so
Powers?
I have a question. So I compared this plan to the one that we approved in July. And I would just like to get a better understanding of the 2 years that, only the first 2 years that we're looking at. When I'm looking at, I'm sorry, let me go back. I'd like to get a better understanding of things that weren't on the plan, that are now on the plan, that are deemed urgent, because you're doing them within the next 2 years, and sort of your how do you say, your rationale of why. And for an example, and I hope I got this right, because I have my little marks on here. Like, for example, in Five Hawks, replace the egress doors. I don't believe that was originally on the plan.
It was not.
Right, so maybe if you can give more visibility. I mean, I see that the overall budget, it looks like we're still on budget for the total budget, correct me if I'm wrong. We were at 1.4 million, now we're at 1.582 for the 25-26 school year, so we're just a little bit over budget, a budget of where we were budgeted. And then, yeah, so if that's what I'd like to understand is, because there's several items on here that weren't included originally on the plan, but now they're included.
So let's do for the overall one first. The plan that was originally in place, I didn't have a chance to really evaluate buildings before then. As I've been evaluating them, I will look at the priorities for all of those different things. For the egress door situation at Five Hawks, that was actually a fire code violation that we had to correct, which is why it's been scheduled now. Hopefully we don't run into any more along those lines because that's expensive. Were there any in particular other than that one that really stood out?
Replaced the fire alarm panel system at
At
Glendale.
Glendale.
There's actually quite a few at Glendale. And then the movable gym wall repair, replaced curtain wall, and cracked ceiling and seal coat all lots. Those were not on the original plan, I don't
They were not.
believe.
And there's where we run into that priority thing. That fire panel actually degraded this winter. We are at the point where we're worried whether it's going to fail imminently. So it absolutely needs to be replaced.
This is one also, I'll just say that we've gotten multiple calls on, not from our own staff, but actually from the community as well, when they hear these things going off intermittently and wondering, is everything okay at the school? So this one is really kind of giving us a run for our money.
It's currently functioning, but it's functioning at about 85%. So we absolutely have to replace it, or there again, we can't occupy that building. The curtain wall in the gym, the company that originally built that wall, Huffcore, is no longer in business. We cannot get the replacement parts. So I got a couple of different estimates on that one. To go with the exact same style of door would cost us just shy of $180,000. The type of replacement I'm looking at is going to cost us a much smaller percentage of that. That's why the number is on there.
Thank you. And then the, let's see, Hidden Oaks has the loading dock.
Yep.
And then at the high school, replace the fire curtain in the auditorium for $52,000.
So there again, that's one of those periodic inspections that we have. Last year, the fire curtain had to be treated in order to maintain being used. It was not able to hold that treatment, so it absolutely has to be replaced. Otherwise, that space must not be used.
I think that's all I had, and I appreciate you sharing that, clarifying the, I think it's really helpful for our community here that,
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Kind of the logic behind these decisions and that, that there is needs out there that need to be repaired, so thank you.
Anyone else with any question? Director Mason?
A general question about, as we make decisions on building closures, obviously that will impact this plan, I assume. And things we maybe choose not to do or shift funding.
That's
elsewhere.
actually a very good question. So there are certain things, it depends on how we proceed with the building closure.
Right.
If we proceed with closing, there's a good chunk of these things I still will need to do. If we proceed with closing and selling a property, that's a different story.
Right.
Like when I proposed to Dr. Thomas originally the chance that we could sell the district services center, those projects could be just, what we can push, we're pushing. If it's an absolute urgent need, we'll still be doing those things. But in this case, I want to push them as long as we can so we can make those savings and spend the money in other places. The school's the same thing. I'm not recommending that we close and sell a school, but if we did, then yeah, those costs for the LTFM would be shifted to something else. But we would still need, I'm going to need to replace the roofs. I'm going to need to keep the air conditioning and the heating running. There are a lot of things that I would need to keep going. A cost that I wouldn't necessarily need to keep doing would be a carpet replacement. If it's going to be a district services center at the new school, we can deal with carpet aging a lot easier than we would in a classroom situation.
Anything else, Director Mason?
No, but I assume, we don't have district services center on here, right? So that's.
That's been put on, that's one of the ones I put on hold, and I believe it's at the very bottom. If it's not, I apologize. I wanted to make sure and differentiate that. I also differentiated the swimming pool at Twin Oaks, the work in there, and put that on. I am still proceeding with getting those estimates verified, but as of this time, I'm still putting that section on hold.
Got it. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yes, I just had a question. Director Powers, you mentioned at the very beginning that there's some projects that aren't on here because we can't use LTFM money for those. Can you just What are some examples of those? I'm sure you have lots. By the way, I had to look up what tuck pointing was. Thank you for that education.
Something all the
But yeah,
time.
exactly.
I have, and this is something I can share at a future date, but it would be overwhelming. I really don't want to throw that much stuff at you.
And I'm just curious, totally.
Lighting.
Lighting.
Initially, I had put the lighting on, the initial budget I submitted to all of you at the first part of the last week. Conversations with the state, I'm not allowed to use the LTFM funding towards the type of replacement I wanted to do.
Why?
It's a convoluted argument, partly because even with these blinking fluorescents, I can find a bulb-type replacement for LED. And they consider that a light bulb, which is something that is expendable and can be changed out. I mean, ideally, we want to replace the entire fixture, but they don't look at that as a good use of that money. So I'll be proceeding for stuff like that to try and find an alternate way to do it. There are lots of different things, and I'll bring those forward as I identify them. Some of the other things that we are looking at that have been identified, but not necessarily anything to do with capital. The entryway, having a different security entryway at the high school was discussed with the capital levy. I can't put that in without capital money. I can't use LTFM or anything along those lines because it's new construction. There's several things that we consider in that. The camera servers, I mean, the camera servers are about to fail on us. I cannot spend LTFM money on those. So there's a lot of different types of things like that. And I could go on for a while.
That's helpful. Thank you very much.
And Director Powers, are any of the LTFM costs that you were newly identified costs, are they being driven by legislative changes?
None of the ones I've identified.
Okay.
You'll notice most of the ones that I've added to this list are things like indoor air quality type things, like the heating and air conditioning system or the roofing projects. Now, a lot of those roofing projects are past the 10-year, but I included them on here because I know they're coming up. They're going to be a cost that we need to associate with these things. And my goal, and I've talked to Superintendent Thomas about this, I make sure I'm planning. I'm doing the snapshot for 10 years, but I want to get the life cycle of everything I possibly can. One of the things that we're doing right now is an evaluation of every boiler in the district, all of the heating and air conditioning systems, all the motors that go with that, and finding out what their life cycle is, more than what their warranty is. There's often a very big difference between warranty and life cycle. Some of our stuff, we're 2 to 3 times past what our warranty period is. So I need to make sure that I at least identify, okay, where are we looking at for, what do I look at for life cycle? We're 110% of the life cycle on this one, then I better look at replacing it. Even though it's working right now, there are critical system things that I cannot let go that long. If they fail, we're in trouble. So it's those types of things I'm going to continue to keep identifying, and that will probably add on to that list. And that's where the priorities will shift again. I would love to replace all the carpets in all the older buildings, but there again, that's to me is a lower priority than making sure that the kids are safe and comfortable in the environment they're in.
I think the one that I was sort of referring to has to do with refrigerant or I don't even know. I just know my air conditioner guy talked to me about it. But converting to a chilled water system, which is a hefty fee. So I wondered if that had to do with the legislative changes.
It doesn't. That's something, and I'm glad you asked about that. That's more of a, so we've got a different, I don't know how detailed you want me to do.
You don't need
We've
that
got,
many.
it's a different type of heating and air conditioning
I'm just
system
curious.
attachment. You think of it as like air conditioners for each one of your rooms versus an air conditioner that deals with the entire building. So it's more of a economy of scale type of upgrade. You know, so those are the types of things that not only gives us better air quality, but gives us cost savings. So that's why I have a couple of the schools scheduled already in the 10-year. And I will add more as we evaluate those buildings that could use that type of a system.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? All right, thank you, Director Powers, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Moving on to the proclamations. Our first proclamation is for the National Assistant Principals and Deans Appreciation Week. Director Atkinson, would you mind reading that?
Yeah, thank you. Prior Lake Savage Area Schools recognizes April 7th through the 11th of 2025 as Assistant Principal and Dean Appreciation Week. Our assistant principals and deans provide essential support to more than 8,600 PLSAS students and more than 1,400 employees. This week, we celebrate our thanks and gratitude for these essential leaders. Whereas, Prior Lake Savage Area Schools employs 6 assistant principals and 11 deans. Whereas assistant principals and deans are vital members of their respective buildings and the broader district leadership teams, instructional leaders to students and staff, culture and community builders, facility managers, special program managers, and are trusted with the education and development of young people. Whereas assistant principals and deans provide students with opportunities and guidance to ensure their success and development as positive contributors to our schools and broader community. Whereas assistant principals and deans inspire a passion for learning. Whereas assistant principals and deans work with all stakeholders to foster a sense of community and pride within our schools and districts. Therefore, let it be resolved, the Board of Education hereby extends its appreciation to assistant principals and deans for supporting the education of our students and proclaims April 7th to 11th, 2025 to be Assistant Principals and Deans Appreciation Week in Prior Lake Savage Area Schools. Thank you.
Director Edwards.
Yes, thank you, board members, for this recognition of very key players in our system. They are frontline folks who each and every day are working with our students, often outside of the classroom setting, to help them navigate their days and help them be successful. As is noted, they also are engaged in instructional leadership, in the case of the assistant principals, very much working with their respective principals to support all of the great work that happens for our students via our teachers. And in the case of the deans, they are truly the front line when it comes to student management and helping our students to engage in proper conduct and choices and help support in setting the stage for what that looks like. We very much believe in our positive behavior intervention system and making sure that we're teaching our students what our expectations are, and our deans are key leaders in that work in helping our students navigate their days each and every day. So thank you for that recognition of these two key employee groups within our system.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next proclamation is Media Specialists. Director Olstad, would you mind reading that proclamation?
Absolutely. Prior Lake Savage Area Schools recognizes April 7th through 11th, 2025 as Media Specialists Appreciation Week. Our media specialists provide media support and guidance for our more than 8,600 students, preparing them for success in a globally competitive world. This week, we celebrate our thanks and gratitude for these essential staff. Whereas media specialists provide guidance to students through print media, literature, digital resources, and technology. Whereas media specialists provide professional development and support to teachers and other school and district staff. Whereas media specialists set students up for success in their future education and careers by teaching them how to search for and research information. Whereas media specialists support students in their use of technology to help create equitable access for all students and to empower and enhance the teaching and learning experience. Whereas media specialists are a wealth of knowledge and information who come up with creative ways to teach and connect with students. Therefore, let it be resolved, the Board of Education hereby extends its appreciation to all Prior Lake Savage Area Schools media specialists for supporting the education of our students and staff and declares April 7th through 11th, 2025 to be Media Specialists Appreciation Week in Prior Lake Savage Area Schools.
Once again, Board, I'd like to thank you for recognizing this group of employees. They represent a group that really has evolved over time with regard to the types of support that they lend to our students. It truly is a frontline group that helps our students adapt, develop some adaptive skills. In this proclamation, we reference the skills of research, for example, and helping our students navigate and understand and investigate and in the case of our elementary students, help find that love of reading that is so vital to their success and development of their literacy skills. So we very much value the work that our media specialists have done and continue to do in helping our students find the skills that they need to be successful in a variety of ways.
Thank you. Next proclamation is the Equity Services Staff Appreciation Week. Director Franz, would you mind reading the longest of the four?
Prior Lake Savage Area Schools recognizes April 7th through 11th, 2025 as Equity Services Staff Appreciation Week. Our Equity Services staff support the development of learning environments to ensure high achievement for each and every student. This week, we celebrate our thanks and gratitude for these essential staff. Whereas the month of April is Celebrate Diversity Month, a time to recognize, honor, and celebrate the diversity surrounding us. Whereas the Equity and Inclusion Department staff consists of a Director of Equity and Inclusion, Administrative Assistant, American Indian Ed staff, Cultural Liaisons, and teachers in the English Learner Department. Whereas members of the Equity Services staff have developed an achievement and integration plan to address the achievement gap by developing cultural awareness in our staff and students, providing equitable academic opportunities and support, and increasing student and family engagement. Whereas members of the Equity Services staff support staff and students to overcome barriers to closing the achievement and opportunity gaps that many students face through providing professional development and connecting to community resources. Whereas the Equity and Inclusion Department provides resources to staff to close the language barrier and increase the understanding of the refugee and immigrant experiences through collaboration and various refugee resettlement agencies and providing interpreting support. Whereas members of the Equity Services staff works collaboratively with teachers and principals to support the marginalized students, focusing on building inclusive and safe classrooms where every student feels a sense of belonging, seen, safe, and secure, allowing them to reach their fullest potential. Therefore, let it be resolved, the Board of Education hereby extends its appreciation to all Prior Lake Savage Area Schools Equity Services staff for supporting the equitable education of our students, and declares April 7th through 11th, 2025 to be Equity Services Staff Appreciation Week in Prior Lake Savage Area Schools.
Dr. Thomas.
Thank you. On behalf of Director Oak and all the staff that he gets to work with every single day throughout our district, I want to say thank you in their honor. This amazing team of folks are working tirelessly to meet the unique learning needs of each and every one of our students and staff. You know, one of the things that Sam and I, or Director Oak and I, talk a lot about is, you know, how do we define equity? And equity is to give students and staff what they uniquely need to be successful. And that's something that I think our district prides ourselves on. It's something that we see at the center of our strategic plan as well, that everybody has a unique way of learning, a unique need that they need to possess, and that's something that our staff is committed to doing, irrespective of the backgrounds and situations that our students and our staff may come from. So again, thank you so much for the commitment on behalf of the work that we do here in Prior Lake Savage Area Schools around the work of equity.
Thank you. Our last proclamation is for National Occupational Therapist Month. Vice Chair Bullion, would you read that one?
Absolutely. National Occupational Therapist Month, April 2025. Prior Lake Savage Area Schools recognizes April 2025 as National Occupational Therapist Month. This month we celebrate the occupational therapy profession and the contributions occupational therapists make in the school setting. Whereas the school board recognizes the invaluable contributions of occupational therapists to our educational system and the well-being of our students. And whereas occupational therapists play a vital role in fostering student success by addressing physical, cognitive, sensory, and emotional challenges that may hinder school progress. And whereas occupational therapists collaborate with educators, parents, and other professionals to create individualized interventions and support plans that promote students' independence and participation in school activities. And whereas occupational therapists employ innovative strategies, inclusive and evidence-based practices to facilitate students' engagement in learning, socialization, and daily routines within the school environment. Therefore, let it be resolved, the Board of Education hereby extends its appreciation to all Prior Lake Savage Area Schools occupational therapists for their work supporting students and proclaims April 2025 to be National Occupational Therapist Month in Prior Lake Savage Area Schools.
Thank you. We have 6 occupational therapists that work with us birth through grade 12. And sometimes people ask me, well, what do they do? And I honestly reply back with, what don't they do? They really are, their breadth of knowledge across so many different things, it seems endless. And they do quite a bit of work across 11 buildings and about 320 kids that they serve just in the 6 of them. So thanks for honoring them. We certainly are lucky to have them here, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to policy. Dr. Thomas, were you requesting a break now or after the 800s?
After the 8 and 9,
Okay.
sorry.
All right, then we'll move on to policy. We have a number of policies presented tonight in the 8 and 900 categories for first readings. So we'll start with policy 801. Director Herman.
Thank you, Chair White, members of the board. 801 is a new recommended policy. Previously, there was sections of this combined with policy 902. When questions arose at the Policy Advisory Committee, we sought legal counsel, and with the two being combined, it was really conflating the legislation around these two areas. So the recommendation was to pull them apart to align with MSBA's model policy. So 801 you see here as a new policy in response to that.
Okay, any questions or comments on 801? Okay.
Yes.
Director Olsted.
Sorry. Under definitions, which is section 3, letter E, secondary school, shouldn't we include 6th grade in that?
Dr. Olsted, I can double check the statute, but that might be coming directly from the statute language on that.
Okay, I wondered about that, but can it be by school district? Because there's some middle schools that have 6th grade, others I know don't.
Director Olsted, I'm happy to look into that, but I believe if it's statute driven, then my recommendation would be to follow the statute on that.
So if we, to that point, so then 6th graders wouldn't apply to this policy then? Again, I mean, you can ask that question, but that's stood out to me.
Director Olsted, members of the board, I'm happy when looking into that to get clarification on that.
Okay, thank you. And then the one piece, unless I missed it, does this, I know there were a couple of places where, like a staff member who attends doesn't they need, in a sponsor role. Do meetings like this require a staff member to attend?
Director Olsted, members of the board, that my understanding is that they're not required to attend.
Not
There
required.
would be a facilities use situation.
Okay, that was my understanding too. I just wanted to make sure I was reading that correctly. And does statute have anything like this for staff as well?
Director Olsted, can you please expand on that question?
The equal access to school facilities, does that exist for staff as well? In our purpose, it says for students.
Director Olsted, I do not believe so. I think that the equal access to schools is strictly in regards to student access.
Okay.
Is there anyone else on 801? Okay, we'll move on to policy 803.
Thank you, Chair White, members of the board and community. My laptop is being slow. This one, we have limited recommendations, just some cleanup on the policy.
So I had a question, So I had a question on this policy. This is not an MSBA policy. And my only question is that as we've been working to get procedures out of policies, I personally feel like this is more of a procedure and wondering kind of why we have a policy on this when it feels like more of a procedure.
Director Atkinson, members of the board, I'm not aware of the history of when this policy was originally brought forward in 1987. Maybe it was required at that time, and it hasn't since been required. I do not know that policy history there, but I can confirm it's not a required policy.
Any other questions on this one? Should, under number 4, under section 3, the general statement, just a question, should it say institute a district-wide locked door program instead of just, or am I being redundant?
Chair White, that was actually a very robust conversation at the Policy Advisory Committee, so I don't feel you're being redundant. At the end, we decided to strike it so that it could be open-ended for whether it's district or whether it's building related, because there could be some different needs and different times when the facilities are in use. But I welcome Vice Chair Bullion and Director Johnson to share if they have a different recollection of that conversation. But your question was a very robust conversation at Policy Advisory Committee.
Okay. All right, fair enough. Any other questions on 803?
Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry. I was just going to add, while I do feel that this has is really heavy on procedure, I do think it's an important policy to keep, so I don't want to take away from that. There's other ones in here that I feel are more procedure that we don't maybe necessarily need, but this one I do think is necessary. I think there's a lot of important information that our community can reference, like the locked door policy, and then keeping number 3, especially, keep all employees, students, and parents, legal guardians informed with accurate information if an incident occurs. So I do think it's important to keep it, even though it's procedural.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Moving on to 804, Director Herman.
Chair White, members of the board, again, there's no substantial changes to this, just cleanup of the policy structure.
Questions or comments?
I was just going to comment too, I didn't see this in MSBA, so I assume this isn't a required policy. Like, is that something we need, or it's just kind of procedural?
Director Mason, I can confirm this is not a required legislative policy, and that would be the will of the board if they would like to strike this and move to procedures or leave as policy.
Yeah, that was, for this one in particular, I feel like it could either be moved to be one tiny bullet point in 805 to basically, because in 805, we are talking about waste reduction and recycling and being energy efficient rather than having a separate policy. So I would go with that recommendation of not needing it, and then we could move it into 805 as a bullet point.
Uh,
And members of the committee or Director Franz, a comment?
Energy efficiency is different than waste and recycling. And I wanted to ask a question. If we do perform with our utility company to come in and actually do the annual energy efficiency review that we've done periodically before?
Director Powers.
Sorry, Director Powers.
In particular, for the energy efficiency side of things, it's part of a contract that we have that we're monitored constantly. And then it's gone on, there's a specific site that we put all the information on, which shows us how energy efficient we are compared to our peers. Same size buildings, same size industry. So we are constantly, it's a constant. And I actually have my maintenance lead is working on this. That's part of his job function, is to make sure that we are maintaining that level and trying to do the best we can with the resources we have.
Is that still done with the utility companies where they come in and actually perform that, and also a cost savings?
We haven't done it this season,
Right.
but yeah, every other season we do it. It depends on, usually they have really good specials when they do it, so we want to hit it on the good cycle. But yes, I plan on having them in on the next time.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Director Olsted?
Chair White, I'm sorry, before we move forward, I had one little thing on 803.
Okay.
Is that okay? It's just, it's very simple. It's just legal guardians should be plural, that's all, in the 2 spots. I just saw that.
Director Olsted, thank you. I have that noted.
Absolutely.
And then would either one of the committee members want to speak to Director Atkinson's concern on 804?
I have no issues with removing 804 and moving it in with 805. I think it makes sense, honestly, to combine them together and just putting all, and if Director Herman can tell me, is 805 MSBA as well?
Director Johnson, members of the board, the only two policies we're reviewing tonight that are required legislatively are 806 and 810.
Okay.
In terms of MSBA policy, I can look that up quickly.
That's fine,
on
that's
which ones
fine.
they have templates for.
806 and 810, that's, so we can, 804 is not that large, so I don't think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't look like it would be that much of a add if we were to take that and just put it as a bullet
It would be a
into.
total change of purpose, because the waste reduction and recycling is focused on disposition of waste materials, and the energy efficiency is focused on cost, our building utilities, our ability to save on heating and air conditioning costs. One of the reasons why we replaced a lot of our lights, because the utility company was to save on electrical costs. So they are two different purposes. And you would have to change the title of 805 because obviously waste reduction and recycling is not energy efficient.
I'm sorry, just to ease your mind about that, under the general statement of policy, it does talk about rethink, reduce, which when you think about reduce, I would think energy efficiency would fall into reduce. It also says reuse and recycle, which is more the waste reduction, the recycling. But we do reference the 4 R's, and reduce, I would see as energy efficiency. So I do think it could be underneath there. And I would be fine. This is actually an MSBA policy as well, and there are some statutes that it does follow. And there's, my question also in this is there's things that we don't have in this policy that MSBA does have in their policy that are very statutorily required, like they recommend using a certain kind of paper and double printing, and there's lots of things that we don't have in this policy. So I was kind of wondering, like, how close was this reviewed in the policy committee of how it aligned to statute versus what's stated in our policy? Because I felt like there was actually some misses compared to MSBA.
I can ask Director Powers to come up in regards to the review of this policy. And while he's coming up, Director Johnson, to confirm 804 is not an MSBA and 805 is an MSBA. They have model policy for 805, but not for 804.
Yeah, and I'm referring to Minnesota statute 16C.073, purchase and use of paper stock printing. I mean, there's a whole bunch of statutes in here that are represented, so they're not represented in our policy. Not even the reference of the law as they are in the MSBA policy.
I can honestly say it would have been a miss on my part. Okay. That would have been all. I can definitely review it, and we can look at however we need to with the policy committee.
Yeah, I mean, my recommendation based on that was, I think I'd almost recommend going back and relooking at it and comparing it to MSBA, because I feel like there's some big misses in the policy from my viewpoint of looking at it.
So would anybody object to, so are you still talking about the desire to see if we can combine 804 and 805?
Then you could see if you can combine them as well, yeah.
Dr. Franz?
I object to that because the first one's the cost savings, and the second one, the 4 R's, the reduce, rethink, recycle, reuse, is what we place on garbage cans. And our thing in the cafeteria, and the entire policy is on, and all the statutes are about, obviously, the correct paper that can be recycled, and management of solid waste, certain dry cell batteries, rechargeable batteries, the disposition of, and the disposal of motor vehicle fluids, which I do think is a separate, totally separate process and policy than our energy efficiencies with regards to what the other one focuses on, which is our utilities. So I would, and it would require a new title for the other one, and also the MSBA does not have that in there. So I personally am very proud of the fact that we are concerned about our energy efficiency and have been for some time, and make extensive strides to make sure that we are utility-wise energy efficient. So
My
I do
only
think they're
comment would be
separate.
excuse me for interrupting you, Director France. My only comment would be if 805 is a part of the regular policies for the state, that I would not necessarily want to combine something that is not a part of the regular policies. But I will definitely go with the will of the board.
I was just thinking, since this is not it's a few paragraphs, not a huge deal. I am a little more concerned about what you brought up, to make sure that all those statutory requirements are included in 805. That's a bigger deal to me than whether or not we have another page in our gigantic policy book. So if that's okay with the rest of the board, we can leave this one as is, and then I'm sure the policy committee can relook at the next one. Thank you. Okay, so I guess we're down to 805 then, even though we kind of already discussed it. So you're clear on 805? Okay, then let's move down to 806.
Chair White, members of the board, this is a required policy. Also, there is MSBA model policy on this one. There has been some changes. There was very robust discussion at the Policy Advisory Committee around the balance between including important information required by statute, but also not including information that could be accessed by bad actors that would give them intel that we wouldn't want I want them to have. So there are some changes based off of that conversation from Policy Advisory Committee to try to strike that balance.
Any questions around 806?
I have a couple questions. So the first question I have is under the purpose. We include the word as appropriate. Why is that necessary? That's not included in MSBA policy.
Director Atkinson, members of the board, this was part of that conversation at the Policy Advisory Committee where we were delineating between what the community members need in terms of making sure they have the access that they need in order to be in our buildings safely versus not putting out information that bad actors could then access. So that was as part of that conversation to add those words to make it clear that we would only be providing information as appropriate to ensure the safety of our students and staff.
Thank you for clarifying that. And then the other question I had is under section, my apologies, let's see, 3, I believe it is. It's called the active shooter drill. There's a lot of reference, there's actually a lot of information in the MSBA policy about the active shooter drill. And some of the language I really appreciated because it says things like a student must not be required to participate in an active shooter drill simulation, and talked more about like parents' rights and students' rights about participating. We don't list them. We just list the statute. And I think under this one specifically, due to the sensitivity of the nature of the topic, I would almost like us to see us include some of the language that's included in MSBA regarding the active shooter drill participation. It's really falls under statute. It's actually under, let's see, the Every Student Succeeds Act, the Unsafe School Choice Option, and the Disaster Relief. And actually those two I think are the biggest ones that it's under, so.
Director Atkinson, members of the board, this was a change that was made a couple of reviews ago, and the Policy Advisory Committee recommended keeping it this way because of the changes in statute, and then the need to then correspondingly change the policy from there, knowing that we would be following the statute requirements if we were to choose to do an active shooter drill. And so that was the recommendation at the time that the Policy Advisory Committee discussed it at length at the last committee meeting. And that's just where the Policy Advisory Committee fell. But again, if Vice Chair Bullion or Director Johnson has anything to add, that was my recollection of the conversation.
Director Johnson?
This was another one that we discussed in depth to less is more due to bad actors. We didn't want them to just be able to go to one place and find out anything that we did when it comes down to it, right, to crisis management. So if somebody wanted to do something that is negative towards us, they would have to really search right, to find out anything for us. So that's why we kept it very vague and said, this is what we're gonna do. All of the schools, please correct me if I'm wrong, have everything that they would do if this was going to happen. But that's why we kept it vague within the policy.
All right, thank you. Comments, Director Atkinson?
I appreciate that. My only question is that, do we hyperlink statutes in our policies? I know they're listed, but are they hyperlinked so that a parent could click on it and see that they have the right that to opt their student out of an active shooter drill if we were to do that?
Director Atkinson, members of the board, we determined at the Policy Advisory Committee and subsequent board meetings at that time to not link into the statutes because they do change frequently and then the links get broken. We did decide to move forward with linking to our district policies because we have more control over the district website. We know when those changes are happening to make sure we don't have broken links for long periods of time. So that was the decisions that were made at that time that we have moved forward with. But if it's the will of the board to start attempting to link to statutes, we can certainly move forward with that.
Anyone comment on that? Was that discussed? That the hyperlinking, was also?
Not at this past policy meeting, it's been discussed.
Okay.
Prior, that because the statutes change so often, it would potentially cause more issues than.
Then I would I would ask, like, I don't know.
They're listed.
Yeah, no, I understand, but like key important points, like a student must not be required to participate in an active shooter simulation. I mean, how many parents are out there reading the statute to know that, you know? I mean, sometimes it takes research after the fact, after something happens, unfortunately.
Dr. Atkinson, members of the board, it's my understanding from the statute that we are required to inform them if we were to do such a drill with students. We do not do active shooter drill with
Yeah, no, I
students.
know.
If we were to make that change, there are also communication requirements that we'd have to follow per statute. For that exact point that you brought up, Director Atkinson, that not everybody is aware of that, so it would be our responsibility and our commitment to make that communication to parents before we would ever move forward with a drill of this nature.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
There's nothing else on 806. Move down to 807, naming buildings and facilities.
Chair White, members of the board, I apologize, my computer is being slow again. This is another policy that we do not have substantial changes for. It is not a required policy, and there's just minor editorial changes.
Questions or comments?
I had one comment. I found this policy very interesting because the rarity that it actually happens, but I can understand, maybe even with your history on the board, how important it is to have a policy in place. The only thing that I found to be interesting about the policy is the purpose really says that the naming of the school boards, or of the school buildings, is the responsibility of the school board. But then when you go under general statement of the policy, it says when naming a school building, major portions of school buildings or school grounds, the school board shall, and they grant that to the superintendent who establishes a committee, and then it is subject to board review. So I'm just wondering if the board should establish an ad hoc committee versus willing it off to the superintendent to do that. So,
I think,
since we're saying in the beginning that it's our authority and our responsibility.
I think in the end, go ahead, you can comment first.
Well, when we named Hamilton Ridge, the superintendent at that time sent out actually a survey of ideas, and the board approved what the superintendent said. And then I know that when Red Tail Ridge started, that's before a lot of people's here's time, they did set up a committee who then decided to send out a survey. So
right.
We kind of ended up in the same place each time. And then it was, the superintendent and staff came to the board with ideas, and then we discussed it and then delegated it back down.
And I think the spirit of this is that some kind of a community a committee is set up, and we receive some options, usually 4 or 5 for us to choose from, so that at least we have a sense of what the community might want. So I have no problem leaving it the way it is, as long as the end result is we have something come back to us that we can choose from.
And it does say at the end of the policy, it says the school board retains the right to make the final determination in the name of the building. So I'm fine that, it's basically the picking of the committee is, that authority is granted off to the superintendent to establish a committee. So that's the part where I was like, should the board be establishing the committee?
Most of the time, we do delegate
Yeah,
that work
I have
to
no
the
problem with that, I guess,
superintendent, yeah.
personally,
And the board has to vote on the naming.
on the final,
I don't-
yeah. Okay, any other comments for that one? All right, moving on to 809, parking and traffic.
Thank you, Chair White, members of the board. We did have some changes on this one. If you go to the end of the policy under the penalties for violation, we reached out after a policy advisory conversation to our SROs to ask about that statement. And because the changes for parking and traffic do change quite frequently and they go across multiple different statutes, it was difficult to link to any specific ones or state any specific ones. So based off of the recommendation from the SROs, we did strike the and the shall be guilty of a petty misdemeanor and to just be generic that it shall be subject to the Minnesota statute, because depending on the violation, it could be something more or less than a petty misdemeanor, and the amount of statutes that it could impact were far too many to list. So that is the major change. The rest are just editorial changes for cleanup.
Questions? Director Atkinson.
Sorry, I'm happy we have policy. I just want to know who enforces the policy, honestly, from a procedural standpoint. I mean, it's great to have a policy, but if nobody is enforcing it, you know. I mean, because I'm thinking football games, everybody parks on the lawn. You know what I mean? So I just, like, there's violations left and right that I can read through the lines on this one, so.
I was actually thinking the same thing, a homecoming game where there's
Seriously, yeah.
6,000 people there. Is it, how do you?
Yeah, and again, I think accommodations are made, and you'll see at homecoming games, even with our police there, you typically wouldn't have police supporting people parking on boulevards and things of that nature out on the, on that upper hillside where the RV sits. So again, I think within reason, we know we have anomalies, that, yeah, our staff are there to provide safety and security along with, you know, our, community law enforcement and, you know, first responders, et cetera. But generally speaking, on your day-to-day, normal activities, yeah, this is something that our staff adhere to. You know, through our building monitors, parking lot monitors, our deans, our building administration, they are very responsible for the health and safety of our students and staff at all times.
And actually, those big events, I appreciate the police working with us and understanding
Yeah.
that it's a community
Yeah.
event and
Yeah.
and there's a little bit of leeway there, so I've always appreciated that.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, moving down to 810, health and safety.
Chair White, members of the board, this is another required policy with a MSBA model policy available. There's not substantial changes, just cleanup.
Any questions or comments on 810?
I just had one question around, under section, I guess it's 2, after the change, under the general statement of policy and this paragraph, the last paragraph. So the school district's health and safety committee, the MSBA says may form. Do we have this committee? And I think it's optional, right?
Yes, we have a district crisis response team, which serves as our health and safety committee.
Okay. But is that mandatory? I guess, do we want to mirror MSBA saying may form, or?
Director Mason, members of the board, we also have a health and safety committee that is run through our, and I'm blanking on the acronym for them now, but we have a consultant for like workers' comp and different things like that. So we have a health and safety committee that comes together to meet to review frequently these plans, our workers' comp injuries, any trends in that data, and moving forward with that. So that is something that we do have and we have continued to. We don't have any news yet, but we also are aware that there might be changes on the AWARE program on what we are required or not required to do for in terms of workplace injury. So it would be my recommendation that we leave it as that we will have that committee, because I do believe that the importance of it will remain and potentially increase based off whether or not that changes in the near future.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, thank you. Moving down to 902, use of school district facilities and equipment.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, you're,
Sorry, Chair White and members of the board, it's still loading.
okay.
All right,
Mine's slow tonight too. For some reason, it's spinning.
mine's right here. Do you want a hard copy, or do you? I have one.
My apologies, it's loaded now.
Okay.
So this one, we do have changes to, that's based off of the pulling out of the 801 that we referenced to earlier.
Any questions or comments on 902?
I have a question. I have a couple questions, actually. So this policy is driven by Minnesota statute 123.51, which basically talks about, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the authority of the school board and overseeing all the school sites and all that kind of stuff. I think that's the one. But my question goes down to E, so 902.3E, where it says, general community use of school facilities. So it says the school district reserves the right to reject or cancel any request for use of school district facilities or equipment that is contrary or detrimental to the purpose of the schools or school district policies, or if deemed not in the public's best interest. The final authority concerning the denial of a facility or equipment request rests with the superintendent. And so my question is, should that authority rest with the school board? And the reason I bring this up is I do know we've had situations in my term that I've been on here where there may have been some questions about which group gets to use a facility, and granted, everything all worked out great and everything was done well, but I think, I feel like this should lie within the authority of the board. That way you have 7 members of the community who represent the community. And I'm talking about outside groups coming into our school district to use our facilities, which is what this is all about. So that was my concern about this, is that the authority, I believe the authority, because the statute says we have that authority, again, why are we pushing it off to the superintendent? And there has been difference of opinions of should this organization be able to use the facility? Yes or no? This one, yes or no? I mean, and in order to make sure that we have equal, unbiased decision-making, that authority could go to the board.
And I
should go to the board.
I can understand what you're saying. I'm just practically speaking, wonder how that would work. I'd have a hard time wrapping my head around how we would
If there
actually
was
do
somebody
that.
declined, I think, if there was a decision made where somebody doesn't, no, you can't use the facility for whatever reason.
Director Franz?
I believe that if someone was declined and wanted to bring that up in a letter to the board, then they could, and we could deal with that. But we are a governing board, and this is very, very managerial level, and we delegate a lot of that stuff to the superintendent. And quite frankly, if any group, we want to be consistent if we make a decision. So if the board had to sit in there and make a decision at this level, I mean, first of all, people wouldn't get approved in a timely manner. Second of all, it's probably not where we want to spend our time. But if there is a conflict or somebody has an issue, they're more than welcome to bring it up to the board so we can discuss the method by which we have delegated the superintendent that. And that, I imagine, would happen.
Which, that's where I'm saying, we could leave it saying the school district reserves the right, but then it goes to, the final decision goes to the board versus the superintendent. And honestly, in our law, it says that we have that authority. So I don't know why we would want to grant that.
Would it make more sense then, maybe to just increase to take into account maybe what you were talking about, Director Franz? I'm comfortable with leaving it just because of the practicality of this being a day-to-day type of thing. Do we need to, in this policy, somehow state that if there's if someone's rejected and they have the opportunity to come to the board for, you know what I'm saying, Director Herman?
If somebody had a dispute, yeah.
Some kind of a dispute
That's what I was
language?
gonna suggest to it, maybe instead of like the final authority, you say if a conflict arises, comes to the board.
kind of almost like, almost anything else, if an employee or anything would.
I mean, we have similar with the book policy, like if there's, board has final authority over, if you go through the whole process and you're still, you can go to the board for final decision. I wanted to quick reference, what does MSBA have? Because I feel like they had the word was different in theirs as well. So I was going to quickly pull that up.
I don't think they have E in here.
Oh, they don't have E in here? That's where it got
gonna ask
tricky.
that.
See, that's where I found it.
Yep.
So why we have that, that's.
E or F.
So, yeah, and here's the thing, people need to remember that when the MSBA writes policies, they're template policies. And every school district is an independent school district per statute in Minnesota, which is why the law is so broad. So we decide for ourselves. And so MSBA has a lot of language in there that's meant to be broad, so we make it our own. We can put our own policies in here, et cetera. I just want to make sure that no matter what we put in here, we're consistent, not to say final decisions come to us or all disputes of decisions. If it's necessary, then just remind people, if there is a dispute, they can always notify the board and we can have a discussion. But to write language that says that we're the final authority,
That's the law, though,
really
Director France.
managerial.
That's the law.
That's
So it's one-
really
okay.
managerial.
So,
23B51.
yeah, it says that the board, so 123.51.
May authorize the use of schoolhouses.
Yes, use of schoolhouses. The board may authorize the use of any schoolhouses in the district for divine worship, Sunday services, public meetings, elections, post-Saturday elections. It's in with there, so that is where,
So
when MSBA writes it in the policy, they write it in there because it's the board's authority. So I think that, I understand what you're saying about independent school district, but when it ties right back to the law, I don't want that authority to be, how do you say, disregarded.
So we delegate that, just like any other board would delegate to the CEO. Here's our policies, here's our
We don't have to
rules.
delegate it, though, is what I'm saying.
We delegate stuff like that to the leader to then follow through with it. So if we were to actually do that, we would then be a managing board, which, by
That's
the way.
not true, actually.
The MSBA templates do kind of conflate that information in there. So the question is if we're going to delegate to the superintendent, we want to be consistent. You either do it or you don't. And you can't say, well, maybe in this circumstance we do it, in this circumstance we don't. What we need to do is put ourselves at the level of saying we delegate, but when there's an issue, we get involved. And I think that also allows us the opportunity then to deal with those issues as they become issues, but not on a daily basis. Because then what happens when we start to break that barrier, we become responsible for the implementation of policy
Which is what we're also
internally,
responsible
which is
for.
exactly what, when 2 years ago, when we had the attorney come in and talk to us about that wall, so we say, here's policy, you go implement the policy, that sort of thing. And it also absolves somewhat the board of being legally responsible at the implementation level. So we have to be careful about that. We hire a superintendent, the superintendent hires staff, and the superintendent then has the qualifications to do that. We are not in that role. So, but putting language in there that says, okay, reminding people that when there is an exception, that they can bring it up to the board, but we don't manage by exception.
So Director France, I appreciate all that explanation, but just keep in mind that just the way we've done things in the past doesn't mean they've been right. And oftentimes we've delegated too much authority off and not taken responsibility as a board. So all I'm simply doing is trying to point out as we go through policies, places where we have granted that authority, where I'm saying we as a board, we own that authority. It's written in the law. I think it's important for us to ensure that our policies are reflective of the law. And also keep in mind, if this helps our community or even other board members remember this, is that we as the board are the what and the why of decision-making, and the administration is the how and how it gets executed. So if a school group came in and they were denied use of our facility, it would come to the why did you do that? and not necessarily the how of executing and of how you implemented that decision, but it would come back to the what and the why. So I think it's really just a simple word change of that. If we're going to keep this language in here, which is not in MSBA, is just changing the word superintendent to the board, saying concerning the denial of a facility or equipment request rests with the board versus the superintendent, and then it would align back to Minnesota statute.
Chair White and
Director Williams.
Director Atkinson. You're speaking that the law states the authority is with the board. The statute does not use that language. The statute uses the language the board may authorize. It doesn't use the language the authority is the board's. There is a difference. And so while I can appreciate and understand what your concern is, practically speaking, how would that look if it rests with the board? For every, for every time a building is asked to be used, like what might that look like?
I think we'd have to go back and ask MSBA sort of maybe for some guidance on that, but it's really taking that authority away from the final decision of the board. And I don't think about it in our current situation as we sit here today, but I think about it in future situations where a group may come in, and I don't want to give specifics, but there are groups out there, there are activist groups in our community that may come in and say, we want to use the building, and they're granted the authority by the superintendent, and as a board, maybe that doesn't sit well with the community or sit well with the total board. And so the board should have that ultimate authority.
Again, I'm just like practically speaking what that looks like, because going to MSBA, they have their model policy. This part of our policy isn't part of MSBA's.
Correct.
And so there's many policies that we have that we what's the word I'm looking for? That we give the superintendent we delegate that to the superintendent. Sometimes we delegate it to human resources or the business office.
And I would.
In this specific, we do have our buildings being used all the time by sports and, different community things. And so practically speaking, I just think how, unless there has been specific cases where there has been issue, I would entertain, if there is a dispute, like what that language might look like. But to take that delegation away from the superintendent and bring it back to the board, that I just don't see practically how that would look.
Yeah, and I would just say that I know you continue to, Director France and Director Bullion, you say we delegate things to the authority of the superintendent. Yes, we do. That's actually our authority as a board. But this one specifically is in the law. So there's other things that we grant authority.
And I'm wondering if we can
So
kind of get to
maybe
the same.
Perhaps I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
Kitch,
No, go ahead.
I'm trying to see if we can come to some kind of a compromise here.
I mean, if we keep it.
Maybe a compromise, like, can we just strike the sentence and maybe just add the word administration and this, like, school district administration reserves the right to reject? I mean, any dispute in any policy, ultimately, the board would own, right? Like, does it make sense?
That's what I was getting at. Is there some kind of either
And I think-
addition by subtraction or adding
Yeah,
language to make sure that people know, just in case you don't like the decision, remember, you can always bring it.
come to the board.
Come to the board. We
Yeah.
retain our authority while still delegating the how.
Right.
Yeah, and Chair White, yeah, I think that's an important distinction, whether you're a governing board or a managing board. And, a managing board centers themselves around the how, what, and why, for crying out loud. Governing boards do not. And as a governing body of the school district, to Vice Chair Bullion's point, there are hundreds of permits constantly. The 7 of you couldn't manage the load in a timely manner. It would be impossible. So again, I think not to sound hierarchical, but the reason we have a chain of command, if you will, in our school, if you are the ones who are issuing the final say, so to speak, for permits, building permits, there's no way to contest that, right? So this Joel Dahl, Director Dahl, through Community Ed, manages all the permitting, community use of our public resource, these public buildings. If there's a concern or question, then that concern or question comes to my office. If there's a concern or question from there, kind of like the district court, or Court of Appeals, and then eventually it comes to the Supreme Court. So this chain of command of delegation is not to usurp board authority and power. I want to be very clear about that. That's not what this role does. Irrespective of what's written here, ultimately the authority lies with the board on probably 99.9% of everything in this district, right? But there are processes and procedures in place that allow kind of a chain of command or an appeals process to kind of work through how we can enact this, because as a seven board governing body, this, and I don't know if you have the luxury to pick and choose where you'll govern or manage versus where you'll govern. It's all or nothing. It's whatever the body of the board is. So I think I caution you all to consider the magnitude of your scope as 7 independent, individuals providing governance to the board, because you couldn't take on the load. That's why you have a district full of staff that adhere to district or board policy in their day-to-day management.
Dr. Thomas, I just want to clarify, you are one individual as well, and it really is the sentence about the final authority concerning the denial of a facility or equipment requests rests with the superintendent. So it's taking it off of your plate. I'm assuming you don't get hundreds of denials as well.
Yeah, and I'm not questioning that sentence, if that's what you.
That's the question,
Yeah,
that's the
but
sentence I'm questioning.
I'm not speaking to the.
Soften.
Yeah, and that's not what I'm speaking to. I'm speaking to the request of I'm trying to understand the
I would
language in
never,
the
that was
statute.
never my intent. My
No, I'm just saying in
intent
the
was-
statute, I'm sorry, in the statute, I was trying to understand where the statute was explicitly stating the board's job is to do this management work of issuing permits to the, I was just trying to understand
Yeah.
that, because that's what I was hearing.
Yeah, that's not
Would
what
it,
I'm
would it be
saying.
reasonable to say, okay, I think the 2 members of the policy committee kind of heard the discussion, take a crack at, I guess you said softening the language a little bit, making sure that there's clarity here that, just in case, that rare occasion that you're probably talking about, that there is that final arbiter that is us, but not to confuse that with the day-to-day things that Dr. Thomas was talking about. So if that's reasonable, this is first reading, that's why we have the first reading.
Oh, this is first reading.
So we can, if you guys want to take a crack at,
Well, and I would also
Words?
wonder are we supposed to, because it does say in the law that we are to determine a reasonable charge for using the schoolhouse, should we be reviewing these guidelines that also are like a sub-policy of this? Because in here, it talks about like the charges and who's a group priority 1 here. Is this part of the policy that we should be reviewing? Because it's not included in the policy review, which is this whole guidelines and procedures, and I don't, yeah, so, and I
Actually,
know that's been discussed before, is how much we charge people.
It's
So-
not
Dr.
only
France.
been discussed, we actually took it out and made it a separate, and then we also have voted independently on facility use and all that, but we took that out of here, what is it, 2 years ago, I think?
I
When-
remember.
Yeah, and per the will of the board, because it was too detailed, too procedural, and because it can change, and then we do separately vote on that. So that's why that is high level, and for that reason.
so that does eventually come to the board, that document that.
I had the same question though, because it states in here it's presented annually for review. Does
Yeah,
that
it is.
happen regularly? Okay.
Yeah, Jill, Director Dahl brings this fees structure back to the board every year in terms of what we end up charging, for usage, et cetera.
We used to have the fee structure in here, I think, at one time, and then we took it out. But we do vote on it every year, and whenever there's a change
Okay.
because of revenue or whatever. I would suggest that for the superintendent's sake, that we do change that out to say administration instead of superintendent, also per the suggestion from Director Mason. I think that's better fitting, like superintendent does delegate to Joe for most of these stuff, for Director Dahl. So doing that, and then just say, you know, basically reminder if there is an issue,
They can come to us.
That's our job.
Is that fair enough? Director
I
Olmsted?
was just curious, how often does this actually happen?
I've never had. I'm sorry, in my 3 years of being here, I've never had to deal with a concern of a denied use of space.
In my 9 years, no, there's never been an issue brought up.
There was one issue in the last 2 years where it had to do with the charge, where somebody was charged and somebody wasn't. So I do recall that in the last 2 years, but,
Okay. Then we'll,
and
see
you
if-
may be not aware of it, but.
So let's take a crack at that language and we'll go from there.
Chair White, members of the board, I'll connect with Vice Chair Bullion and Director Johnson to connect on that sentence.
All right. If there's nothing else on 902, moving on to 903, visitors to school district buildings.
I just had one comment on, under
Oh,
appropriate,
Director Mason.
sorry, go ahead.
She's waiting for it to load. I'll
Sorry.
let her comment first.
Chair White, members of the board, I apologize, it did come up. We just had minimal changes on this policy.
All right. Now, Director Mason, any questions?
Yeah, so under appropriate communication, I just feel like the language is like subjective and maybe we can make it a little more specific, or just the words like respect and appropriateness, right? Like, how do you define that, right? What I might think is appropriate is not appropriate to you. I feel like in policy, we should be a little bit more direct. I don't know if there's better wording or if we can, you know, I appreciate that we're calling out the things that are not appropriate, but I think some of that language is just really, it's hard to enforce, right? Like,
Appropriate communication.
I mean, actually, my whole concern about that whole section about appropriate communication, I would like, does any of that go against somebody's First Amendment rights? Because like Director Mason said, what one person might consider appropriate and respectful, another person might consider to be appropriate and respectful. So I'm very cautious of including any of that in our policy. It's not included in MSBA. And it raises a lot of red flags for me, the appropriate communication and I feel like it's more procedure driven than even, is it really even necessary in here from a procedure standpoint? Because it's not even in MSBA's policy as well.
we're calling out the items, right, that we aren't allowing, so the language on top of that, I don't know, I just don't know.
So you're saying maybe the language on top isn't
Well,
necessary
it's just
since we
hard
call
to,
out what we.
it's hard to enforce from a policy standpoint,
Yeah.
because it's what I consider respectful, you might not, or, you know.
Director Franz?
I just have a question. Of numbers 1 through 5, shouting, yelling, using obscene language, insulting, demeaning language, threatening and intimidating, and use of physical force, and obviously there's a little bit more in there. What in there would be considered respectful or appropriate? Just to call it out, because I mean, if you're saying that is a violation of someone's First Amendment right, I mean, we don't allow kids to behave that way, so.
Well, there's a lot of shouting that goes on, so.
Like, the way I read it was just like a separate paragraph, right? We were like calling out like being respectful and appropriateness, and then talking about the things we don't sort of allow, if you will, or won't be accepted. I don't know, I just felt like it's hard to define, right? What is. And certainly like shouting or yelling, like that's one thing I might consider someone yelling at me and you might not think it's yelling, you know, I don't know.
Right. I mean, we've had presenters come and some people feel like,
Yeah.
wow, that was intimidating and that was so threatening and other, like,
but we're
well, I
not
don't understand, but.
Talking about presenters here.
Well, it is. They're visitors to our buildings. And so this is visitors to our building. It's not just, not just students. I believe it's any visitors to our school buildings, which this is a school building. This is our school property. DSC is a school property. And I attended an MSBA thing on First Amendment rights, and student rights are different than like the public's rights. And so I'm very, like I said, the whole appropriate communication thing is just, it's not an MSBA. It just raises a lot of red flags for me. in here, so. Especially regarding the language, appropriate and respectful, because who determines what's appropriate and respectful?
I kind of think this is common sense, but I would leave it up to the board. There's nothing in here that wouldn't be in my own company's policy, let alone in here. I actually am, the fact that we have to call it out like this and have had to call it out like this, I think is kind of, is what's, you know, the sign of the times. Yeah, I think most of it in here is kind of common sense.
I don't disagree. I just think it's hard to hold people accountable to policy when it's hard to define what is respect. You know what I mean? It's subjective language. I guess that's my only point.
It probably, we can't get away from it being subjective to a point. I mean, there's going to be a decision made by somebody in authority, depending on what unfolded during the situation. So I'm just wondering if this the way it's written still doesn't allow that leeway, if you will. Maybe you're not comfortable with it. I'm wondering. You don't understand what I'm saying?
Oh, I do. I just wonder if legal should take a peek at this really quick and make sure we're not doing something we shouldn't. Because again, it's not an MSBA. It's very specific to our district. Is it procedure versus in policy? I just, there's a lot of questions I have about it, and I don't know.
I would ask the board if they want to pay for legal to look at this. I mean, do we need to
To avoid any legal fees, yeah, I would, or a legal situation, I would think it's worth it at this point. I mean.
Chair White, I do agree that appropriate communication and then everything that's listed is inappropriate. I do, so I see what you're saying in that. I think the question I would ask maybe is if Director Herman had any thoughts on that, being that it isn't part of MSBA policy. I'm wondering if it's something that we could easily just ask the will of the board, whether we think that that whole section of appropriate communication. I'd first like to hear if you have any thoughts, Director Herman. If not, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm wondering if it's something that we just ask the will of the board, because like Director France says, a lot of it is common sense. There is, and it is kind of mislisted. It honestly should say inappropriate communication. But is that something that should be in our policy? I think that if there is someone who is acting amiss at any time, building personnel, you know.
And I think that's a distinction that we have to make. We're not talking about illegal communication. We're talking about inappropriate. And I think there's a place for us to have some guidelines. We're not saying you're breaking the law. We're saying we have certain rules here. If you're going to communicate with a teacher or administrator, you can't come in, dropping the F-bomb every other word. That's not going to fly. I mean, so that, I think we have that seems reasonable to me, as long as.
I think the biggest words I'm concerned with is appropriate and respectful, because who determines that? And if we say, if we actually were to use, go back to our student code of conduct policy where we say no profanity, no, those two policies, I mean, they sort of kind of come together, the two, in the fact that if we are expecting our students not to use profanity, then we would expect our adults not to use profanity. And that's different than what's appropriate and respectful.
And this is very specific.
It's very specific here.
I guess my concern is like, if you're gonna,
Can I just say something? It's specific, the appropriate communication is communication between parents and legal guardians and other visitors to school with school personnel. Yeah. That is stated up here. So when a parent or a guardian comes in to speak at a school, shouting and yelling obscene language, insulting or demeaning, et cetera. This is really more or less to protect and maintain a respectful behavior in our schools and with personnel. This isn't somebody speaking at the forum either, and I tried to say that before, that we have different rules for that. But I do think it's important that we do protect our staff and not allow our staff to, in turn,
it's a two-way street.
behave that way. So, you know, just to make sure that we're talking about the scope and the boundaries of where this is. And it does say above the 1 through 5, it does say inappropriate. It gives it an example. It doesn't say appropriate and then give the list. It says the following are kinds of inappropriate. So if we read the whole thing, it's fairly spelled out. And then the consequences, you know, again, they're not legal consequences. It's informed. And then if it continues, then it gives staff or the other side the right to terminate the discussion. Basically, it's almost like a 5-step process, which is very, you know, understandable. And it's only in step 5 where it actually rises to that level that it does say that, okay, now you've got a statutory thing and charges may be filed, which I think is very reasonable.
Yeah, I have no problem with it, actually.
I just wonder if there's a way to say something like this policy, or call it the purpose of this part is to determine or to give guidelines regarding communication between parents and legal guardians and other visitors of the school district, period, the end. Because again, it's that appropriate and respectful, because who determines what's appropriate and respectful? And I think there's so much vagueness in that, and that's where we've gotten in trouble in the past as well.
I think I was reading it like you could, you know, theoretically kick someone out of your building for not being respectful, for example, what I consider respectful, but it may not be one of these 5 things, right? Like, so that, I read it as 2 separate things. So that's where I feel like it's just a language thing for me.
Yeah, this is an example, and the title of it is appropriate communication, so repeating the word appropriate, I don't have a problem with that, and I do think that we do need to maintain a respectful environment. So I don't have a problem with the definition of respectful there, but again, I don't think this policy's ever been questioned before like this either, so.
Yeah, I guess if we're trying to create it's almost like a professional, we're gonna deal with each other professionally, we're not gonna go off the handle. I don't see anything that causes me concern personally, because it's pretty specific on who we're talking about. And we're not talking about, I think we have every right as a district to say teachers or staff are not going to address people in a certain way, and vice versa. Yeah. And because it's not productive, and we're trying to act professionally in our settings. And it's again, we're talking about appropriate ways to communicate, not whether they're legal or not. That's just the way I look at it.
Chair White, oh,
Sorry.
Director Herman.
I was just going to make an offer, I think, based off of the robust conversation to date, to similarly with the 902, for Vice Chair Bullion, Director Johnson, and I to get together to tackle that opening paragraph to better align it with the discussion today. That was just the offer I was going to make.
Good idea.
Okay. Yeah. All right. If there's nothing else, we'll take 5 minutes here, and before we move on to the 200s.